Welcome, guys, to a new sort of show that we have going on in Talking Stations. This is going to be a EuroShow, specifically for Euro time zone. I know that the shows that Madral has are pretty deep into US time zone, so we've decided that we wanted to create some content specifically for Euros, and this is going to be it, basically. We have two people here for the show. First is our sort of community lead, I would say. Would you say that? Like community lead, Arya? Say hi, Arya.
Yeah, that's a good description. Community director for TIS. Hello, everyone.
And we have someone who has been making waves in r/Eve to some degree. Public enemy number one, it seems. Mr. Controversy himself, Caleb Ariana.
Hey guys. Yeah, I've actually, on that note, I have actually been listening to old hip hop just because you decided to dub me Public Enemy number one. So I've been going through my old hip hop stuff.
Oh yeah. Let's jump into dual presenter screen mode so you can see what's going on there. There we go. There's Caleb in his apartment there. Anyway, this show specifically is going to be a show that's a little bit different to the usual daily shows. We kind of don't want to be, encroaching too much on Madral's kind of Madral's content to some degree. So this is going to be slightly different. This show is going to be more geared towards sort of CCP as an organization, EVE Online as a game, not really sort of like the happenings going on inside of EVE, as it were. That's more kind of like going to be Madral's area. We're going to be talking about the game as a game. And as a product, CCP as an as a business inside of the games industry, and sort of like the games industry as a whole, but with a particular kind of viewpoint to sort of comparing and contrasting sort of CCP essentially, and obviously.
A more serious show with a bit of outside of the normal boundaries of TIS topics. And you can sit back and relax. It's going to be almost 100% spin-free. No spin, no player stuff, no war. The Public Enemy stuff, I'm taking off that hat. It's not on today.
Yeah. I was like, oh, you had to be controversial the weekend before we're doing this, like
two weekends before. I had Olmeca, the one before that. So
that's true.
We promised no spin, so let's slide that aside and talk about the big news of today, which of course was patch notes. Happening, and Hobo Leaks is showing no change. It's like completely empty.
So let's quickly, I'll see if I can bring up some of the stuff about patch notes. Just give me a second here. But the patch, basically everything that was pretty much on the Singularity server has basically been moved onto Tranquility. Let's just transition here. So what we have,
0 entries all the way down on Hobo Leaks.
Yeah. So what we have is fleet formations are now in the game. We'll cover that a little bit more, sort of the issues with that in a second. We've got expert systems, the controversial expert systems that people are either loving or hating, sort of in there. I believe that the CSM aren't exactly that sort of that much of a sort of fanatical about it. So we'll see with that. And the interesting thing is not actually in the patch, but like something that CCP has announced that they're going to be working on is that they're going to try and they're going to sort of start to work on making a native Mac OS client, which will be interesting. That is, making a native client is always a big endeavor, especially on on an OS that's a little bit different.
Right? We used to have a native Mac client, and I think we also had a not necessarily supported, but we had a pretty functional Linux client, and I'm pretty sure that it still runs fairly okay on Linux and stuff. But the fact that this is now going to be supported, it's just amazing.
I mean, I believe that the sort of Mac OS and Linux share a bit of similarity between the two, so I don't think the bridging the gap is going to be too difficult. But there's still a lot of work that's involved in bringing EVE Online natively to Mac OS.
Yeah, our TIS CEO knows a lot more about living in EVE on Mac clients, because I'm pretty sure he's been doing that since the beginning. So I'm sure we're going to cover that when we actually got something that we can test and use.
Yes. So first thing, fleet formations are now inside of the game.
And broken.
And slightly broken to some degree, but like, it's patch day. Sometimes, patch day has issues. Like there's a reason why patch day is always on Tuesdays and never on Fridays, because if patch days were on Fridays and then like Saturday and Sunday there wasn't anybody in the office to kind of deal with like issues, that would be a big issue. And not gonna lie, I have played games where companies have done patches on a Friday and it's been absolutely terrible, diabolical. The fact that it's the industry norm now to do patches on Tuesday is a very good thing when it comes, for customer satisfaction to some degree.
And being a rather old EVE player, I've kind of started having this meta layer where I actually see patch day as content, because there's always this slight risk that something hilarious will happen, and it has quite a lot of times during EVE history. So the fact that there's like small mistakes and weird bugs and stuff is always a nice little giggle factor for EVE players.
So I did this really cool kind of video that we're seeing here at the moment, was basically showing the various different types of fleet formations. It almost makes me feel like I'm watching that was it that the SketchUp kind of like a SketchUp sort of version of sort of fleet formations, like a video from SketchUp or something like that. But it's pretty cool, like the various different types of fleet formations going on. That's pretty cool. There's definitely my initial kind of thought of fleet formations was basically, if you don't have sort of if you don't have occlusion for line of sight in terms of guns and stuff, it doesn't really make too much sense. In actual fact, there was a previous episode of Talking Stations where Hilmar himself said that. But I think in actual fact, having listened to all the conversation that was going on around FCs talking about fleet formations, that in actual fact there is a degree of interesting kind of gameplay that can even occur now, even though we don't have line of sight occlusion for weapons and gunnery and all that kind of stuff going on in the game. There's still a degree of interesting gameplay that can probably come out of utilizing fleet formations in various different situations. Some of those situations at the moment are a little bit screwed up. Shall we go into how they're screwed up?
And maybe just point out that the thing is that every theory crafter is now figuring out exactly how to use this, right? And we're going to see some very funny things happening, because everyone has been pointing out the whole thing with the bombers, that it's both a complete nerf, but it's also a massive buff. So where it's going to land is a little bit up in the air. We will see funny things. And then there's the whole thing with Warp Behind that I know Sutonia and the small gang people have actually been complaining about a little bit, because it can actually crush their gameplay a little bit.
Their issue is their issue is with the relative formation fleet warp. The issue that they have is essentially when you're kiting ships, you're essentially trying to make sure that they don't land on top of you or land in a position where they can lock you down. And their concern is essentially that the relative formation allows an FC to be able to warp members to a position where not they are, but where they will be within a certain period of time. And so it's a case of the crux of the issue is that they won't be able to kite anymore because a tackle ship will be landing right on top of them, not where they were when the fleet warp was made, but where they will be after, about sort of like 10 or 20 seconds after the ship actually lands in space. But there is an issue with that to some degree, because the relative formation is absolute, sort of in terms of the relative positioning of fleet members to the FC. So you can't rotate that around. You basically need the fleet members that are going to be warped to move to those positions, and it's a lot easier for a small gang kind of solo pilot flying a fast ship to be able to change their direction and therefore change the kind of like the vector that they need to land, that the other ships need to land on. Obviously, when you increase the number of people in that fleet warp, you're obviously increasing the likelihood that someone's going to land in a position where they can get a scram on you and a web on you and all that kind of jazz. But it's when you're fighting small gang or solo against a larger group, like that is always a factor. That is always a calculation that you have to make when you're doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, and all in all, the thing is we don't really know exactly what tweaks need to be done, because they are going to start getting feedback, and they already got a lot of nice feedback from the community, respectively, all the specialists. They were also on Pando's stream and had a nice back and forth with the player base. I personally really like it when CCP is doing this, and I think recently they've been very, very reactive and fast on getting the right feedback, not necessarily just but the right feedback, and actually going in and fixing it pretty much almost instantly. I think we were joking with the fact that Rise basically went in and fixed and changed a balance thing like the day after, and everyone was going, that's like so not Eve. What is this? Usually we have to wait like between anything between 3 months and 3 years for a balance change to be fixed. But in this case, he actually did it instantly. It's like, oh my god, what is this?
That was impressive.
Standard that was new standards in CCP. But they are a little bit broken. There's the funny thing with for some reason when the FC initiates the formation, the relative formation warp, any pilot that's cloaked is not gonna get it. It's like, okay, I can't send you the message, so you're not joining.
So Dopamine actually has put down on the Evo forums some known technical issues. See here, it's basically in terms of fleet warping. Fleet warp at range apparently is currently not working. That's a bit of an issue. That's actually quite a serious issue, to be completely honest. I imagine that's probably going to be priority number one for CCP to fix, like ASAP, because fleet warping at range is a critical thing when it comes to tactical, the tactical landscape.
For users,
so is that broke for all fleet warps now that every warp has a formation, even the default formation?
I would imagine so. I'm not entirely certain, but I imagine that is probably the case. The other thing is obviously that Caleb kind of said is that that cloaked pilots who are cloaked in fleet, ready to warp, won't get warps. This does kind of break some of the kind of interesting gameplay that could have evolved. That essentially some of the fleet warps have kind of made using bombers and bombing kind of a lot more difficult to do. Have a lot less situations where bombing is a viable option. The whole relative fleet warp could potentially create scenarios and situations where you could use bombers in a very unique and creative way. I'm sure we'll see some of those unique and creative ways, but until this kind of bug with cloaked pilots not taking fleet warps, especially with relative formations, until that's kind of removed, we probably won't see like the most creative and most interesting usage of these new fleet formations specifically with bombers.
Well, hopefully it's getting fixed very, very soon, right? I think that the another important one is the high CPU usage that I think is a little bit critical. I hope they figure out exactly what's causing that.
Yeah, and
there's most likely a lot of multi-boxes that are raging right now because they're suddenly cut down in the amount of clients that they can run simultaneously.
Exactly. You know, the issue is specifically, as CCP Dopamine has put down, like high CPU usage on minimized clients. And so basically, you know, if you have minimized clients, obviously that's going to be affecting people who multi-box to a large degree. You'll probably see a lot of those people complaining about, like, you know, them multi-boxing orcas in high sec, that kind of thing. But their CPU usage has ramped up. There is actually an article on r/Eve about that. Basically, someone saying that their kind of clients have gone to about 10 to 15% CPU usage when they were basically sticking at around 1.5% per client. So that's like that is a significant ramp up. That is a 10x fold increase.
But there was interesting things in the patch that you have actually not mentioned that I will actually mention, because even though it's not something that we know a lot about and I haven't seen any of the details, but Hobo Leaks just before the whole patching got activated had this weird entry with spectator mode. And some of us that's been around for a while will remember that this was discussed a long time ago in connection to esports. So they are actually working on an actual spectator mode that can most likely be used for our tournaments in the future. I'm a little bit hyped to see what that is actually going to do and how it's going to work. It's supposed to be put in now for the versus thing, the 1v1 and all those.
I'm trying to find it on the patch notes right now, actually.
I don't know if it's even in the patch notes, but it was in Hobo Leaks and our Hobo League expert, which is usually Fonsui and Spot, was just pointing it out to me and was like, "Oh my God, a spectator mode! Are they actually going to bring us the things that Hilmer was vague commenting on in that interview when he also talked about the future of Hadean and things like collision and occlusion and all the things that they want to do?" So when we're talking about these things, of course, they're not ready yet, right? It takes a while to get these things up and running and working. But this is on the way, guys. This is the direction that we're moving. It's not just pipe dreams. It's really their intention. If they can do it, they're going to.
Yeah, very much so. And I look forward to actually what they want to do in terms of not sort of creative usage, but like the usability of a sort of spectator mode, because there's a lot of issues with, you know, spectating things in Eve in general that you know, it's a little bit difficult when it comes to sort of showcasing large scale stuff and small scale stuff going on in that kind of like, you know, if you're kind of looking at like Titans and Supers and stuff like that, it's okay in terms of, you know, going to a no UI view and sort of like maneuvering around, but like it gets a lot more difficult when you're trying to, you know, showcase sort of say, you know, a bunch of jackdaws fighting each other, because the capacity to be able to sort of control viewpoints at that kind of scale with that kind of speed is kind of really difficult. So I hope there's some sort of usability sort of aspects to the spectator mode that sort of really makes viewing EVE Online without UI on and without sort of like the HUD stuff on, actually a tangible thing, not just for tournaments, but for general sort of EVE fights that that streamers want to actually showcase, because that'd be really, really cool. Not that it's anything that I would be interested in any way, shape, or form, or that we at TIS would, at all.
Well, we don't want to have to fire or lay off our camera guys, right?
No. Like, our camera guys are fantastic. I love them.
We have to touch upon the controversial one at least a little bit.
Oh, expert systems you're talking about?
Yeah, we're gonna have to mention it, right? Because they're in, and now you can actually kind of see what the packages that they are offering right now are, and it's a thing. It's now out, and it is a little bit controversial because it feels like it's completely half finished, right?
If I transition to checking out the expert systems that we have on offer, so we have a core ship operations, which I imagine is going to be to some degree the I believe it's the Magic 14. Is it Magic 14 or? Yeah, it's 14. Oh, I always get a little bit concerned as to whether I use the right number. It's Magic 14 for sure. Yeah, okay, fair enough. And then we have the various different racial explorers sort of stuff. So essentially just stuff to kind of get you moving with regards to various different exploration sort of pathways, and obviously mining barge operator, which is going to be probably, I would say, is probably the more controversial one of the, because it's something that can be seen as a scalable thing that bots and that kind of thing could potentially abuse.
Yeah, there's many things, and there's a lot of math that needs to be crunched. This is a funny situation because it feels like, I think someone mentioned this, it feels like it's something that they've been planning and working on for a while, and I would suspect it's something that's come out of marketing and product, the teams that managed that whole thing of monetization and those issues. And I think it feels to me like they didn't actually polish it and finish it, but they wanted it to come out in this quadrant because otherwise the quadrant would have been a little bit thin. All right. So I think they rushed it a little bit because they haven't done the actual math and number crunching. And let me be fair. I like the price range. I think it's spot on. It's the whole definition of microtransactions, and you're actually. It looks like they really want to give you some sort of utility and value added for it. It's just when you start crunching the numbers and look at how this works with skills and limitations and cost of the actual hulls and stuff like that, it's just a little bit of a mess, and it needs to be tweaked. They need to give it a second pass, in my opinion. There's of course, because this is what he does, the fitting director of the Imperium has actually sat down and done a lot of number crunching and written an article about it. There's going to be more of this because that's more like an editorial like thing and a commentary on the experience. But there's going to be more math coming out from the community that's going to point out where things are a little bit off when it comes to this thing compared to injector cost and Plex cost and all that stuff. So I'm expecting there to be some back and forth between the player community and CCP over the next month or so they can actually land this right, because I think it's a fairly good idea. Maybe I don't necessarily like the idea that it's rented, because that just feels weird to me, but I'm almost going to be inclined to say at some point down the line, just sell these directly as skill point packs, right?
Yeah. Let's see that potentially. But
yeah, Caleb was saying selling skill point packs. We're going to see him on Reddit this afternoon.
Well, I'm trying to live up to a reputation now, so at least I'm not allowed to talk about the war. So mum's the word, but I can still be controversial in other areas.
You're trying to make this this show controversial already.
But if you notice some of the commentary that I've heard from people that I usually talk to about these things, they started out being a little bit angry and frustrated about this as a thing. But I think a lot of them has landed on this is not really a problem, and many have kept saying, well, why not just sell the skill points? It's like, what does that break? It breaks the player's ability to massively benefit from the skill point injection system that we already have so many issues with: zombie farmings, ghost training, abuse of event presence and whatnot. It's like, well, the whole pacifier gate. There's been so many small things with skill point injections. Even though it is a good idea, it just didn't really land perfectly.
It was a little bit too sort of overreaching, in my opinion anyway. Like I kind of feel like the limits that CCP kind of put in place when they kind of brought out the whole skill injection extraction kind of sort of thing didn't really it didn't really sort of curtail some of the more egregious aspects of it in anywhere near as sort of as powerful as they had kind of hoped. You know, there was a... Sorry,
so the prices were different. The prices were different for the different packs. Which was the most expensive one? Was it the fitting skills?
In actual fact...
The two expensive ones was the Magic 14 and the mining, so the barge thing. But again, as mentioned in the article I referred to, the barge is about a 40 million hull, and you can actually get very expensive fits. And then you're outside of the new player, right? A player that wants to spend that amount of either ISK or has that amount of ISK, or can use this, right? They are not interested in this. They will just duplex and then just inject the skills fully.
Yeah, exactly. So as Caleb said, you know, the most expensive one is the core ship operations one, and then the mining barge, and then obviously the racial explorer ones are basically the same price.
Again, this is kind of funny, right? Because I have compared core ship operations, Magic 14, with a little bit of a variant of the old learning skills. And, well, I don't mind if you could just buy that and skip ahead. Like, buy the skip ahead. It's very much like buying a level 70 character in WoW or something. It doesn't bother me from a monetization point of view. Yeah,
it doesn't really bother me, to be completely honest. Like, I kind of feel like the Magic 14 is very much this sort of generation in Eve's sort of version of learning skills back in the day. It sort of prevents a lot of people to actually enjoy the game because they're kind of like, I have to, before. And I'll preface this kind of, because I know that Madril has a kind of viewpoint in this, and it is valid to a degree. You don't need the Magic 14 to do every single thing in Eve. It's just anything where you have to utilize your ship in a way that, like, you have to utilize a ship in a way that to get the most out of it in order to achieve what you want to achieve, is where the Magic 14 kind of really, really comes into its own.
And again, because we have to compare, we're going to talk about other games and other game developer stuff at some point. But again, if we compare these things and the products that we are offered in EVE Online and from CCP, they are so far from what is currently the standard when it comes to monetization. They're definitely not in an unbalanced or abusive place compared to other games, right? And players now are used to being able to credit card for quite a lot of advantage, right? There's massive amount of games that are completely pay to win and in my opinion, completely broken. But we don't really have any of these things in EVE Online. And adding a few of the things where it's still in the catch-up phase, I think that's actually a good thing. We need more products. We need more monetization streams for CCP, because running an MMO, especially running an MMO for a long time, you need money, and it saturates easily, and it's very sensitive to volatility and moods and things like that. And we can't expect to be living in lockdown mode with the massive boost to gaming. I kind of suggested that we cover that, but the amount of boost that the gaming industry have gotten during COVID is like mind blowing. It's
pretty crazy. It is pretty crazy. But yeah, like understanding that CCP is definitely not the sort of like the public enemy number one with regards to like egregious monetization is definitely something that we should note, that should be noted. The other kind of thing, on the flip side of that, obviously, is the fact that people will regard, sort of getting onto the more and more microtransactions as being the slippery slope to eventually, running a lottery, running loot boxes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to be most likely covering many of these things on TIS, not just on this show, but also on the other ones, because we're coming up on the actual 10-year anniversary of Summer of Rage. And there's a lot of story stuff to be talking about in that sense, because it's now 10 years, right? There's a lot of players that have not actually played for 10 years. So they were not around. They have only got the hearsay coverage of all that drama. And it's actually quite important for how far we've come in monetization and where the game industry is today. Because back then it was the beginning of it, right?
Yes, it is. But we should move on in actual fact to.
Are we going to do the magical break, or?
I was okay. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this show is also sort of break it into segments with fairly regular-ish sort of like advert breaks. I'm literally looking at the Talking Stations channel actions thing and going, where is the ad break kind of button? I don't see it. We can't do it, but we can still do it in game and in a very sort of like Eve Pulse style. So we'll do an Eve Pulse style, a word from our sponsors kind of style ad break, and then we'll be back with some more stuff. So we'll see you after the break. And we're back. Hey guys.
Hello again.
So One of the kind of like one of the sort of like core segment of the show is going to be basically sort of discussing an aspect of sort of gaming industry that has come to sort of like be a very important thing to understand about the gaming industry as it currently stands right now. But we're going to lead into that with something that's very much related to it, and it's very much like a microcosm of the scenario, the situation that we have going on, and that's specifically. Sorry.
It's just, this is slightly what in my mind, I call it CCP commenting at the player base, saying, "So you really think you can do better?"
Yes.
Right. It's like if you think CCP is doing so bad, and if you think Eve is doing so bad, if you put it in perspective with what's happening elsewhere, of course, there's always good games coming out. But if you are CCP all day, every day, you might not. You might need a little bit of a perspective correction, because the rest of the gaming industry is just as bad, if not sometimes very much worse.
Yeah, we could definitely take examples out as to sort of how other games companies and sort of news articles about like the happenstance is like so much worse than what we experience with CCP. But that'll be sort of like picking things that make CCP look good. But there are also obviously situations and companies out there and IPs out there that really showcase like how it should be done, right? And we'll also be covering those sorts of things as well, and basically saying like, CCP, why don't you sort of consider doing this or do that sort of thing? So
it's just it's a cutthroat business, right? It's really tough, and whether you're talking about the whole financial stuff or surviving through the ages, or you're talking about hiring brain power and keeping brain power, and there's so many topics that when you're talking about game development that you can of course compare it to other businesses, but I don't think any other businesses have this level of struggle that I see in game development.
Yeah, and Ukalu in chat at the moment, like honestly, I completely understand. Like, we will be covering, the companies and the IPs and stuff that do better, and showcasing you basically saying CCP, like, this is a prime example of how to do it. But obviously, showing both sides of the coin. And in this particular example, is going to be like how not to do it. Well, how to do it and how not to do it in actual fact. But specifically, this is regarding a French company called Frogwares, and they have basically, there's been an ongoing issue that they have had with their publishers, Nacon, and essentially what's been going on, we're not going to go into the nitty gritty or anything like that, but essentially what's been going on is Nacon have been backing out and essentially trying to get the IP, get the all the work that Frogwares has been doing with their IPs, and trying to basically file off the name Frogwares from all of those IPs and rebrand them, resell them as like their own IPs. So there's been a lot of issue with various different things going on in terms of game IPs and sort of things falling on and back off of various different things like Steam, and all various different ways that you can find and sort of like download games, that kind of thing. But it's basically been an ongoing issue where a kind of a very well, how would you define Nacon and their sort of their what they've been doing, Caleb?
Well, I'm mostly frustrated about the fact that this is one of the developers that's actually making the kind of games that I know that Eve players are kind of hot about. It's kind of a Lovecraftian universe, that Sinking City game, right? And it's also one of my personal favorite types of games, even though it's been riled by a bit of problems. It's not as smooth as other third-person action games, but this was definitely one of the type of titles that I would have picked up. And the fact that they now suffer from this whole IP shenanigans, it just shows that this business is really, we use the word toxic a lot, but it kind of is, right? And we know the same thing has happened, especially for smaller developers with smaller titles, where people just steal their stuff and not even like low effort reskins them and just pushes them back into Steam. We've had many of these controversies before. This is just a bit of a higher scale than what we've seen before. This is not necessarily your traditional IP theft or pump and dump thing. This is just a whole new level, right? And I'm just worried that if this thing doesn't get shut down, this is really about. I think this is the publishers like the platform Steam's responsibility to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. I can't see.
They've been kind of working with them. They have been kind of working with the with the developers, Frogwares, right? But it's, I mean, there's so much legality and legalese kind of going on with it. But like, to be completely honest, with all like Nacon haven't exactly been putting much effort into telling their side of the story as such, and backing that up with like relevant information. Like Frogwares have basically been kicking their ass with regards to that. Like Frogwares have been basically they've gotten to the point where they've even discovered exactly who it was who ended up downloading, cracking, changing various different aspects of their game and then re-uploading it to Steam.
It's also because you see many of the publishers that are out now, right? The game development houses and stuff like that. They do have this weird portfolio thing where I don't know if this is something that they get primarily by trading, or if it's reskinning, or if it's IP theft. But it's like sometimes you get these game developer studios that have like, well, the normal ones when they start out is like maybe 2 or 3 titles, but then they start bloating with things where you start wondering, how did you get that? It's like, you've not had enough time to create this many games. You've been in existence for what, 3 years? Are you buying this up and republishing it? Are you stealing it? Where did you get it from, right? And I can see that many of these things, I think there's actually one of them, I know that's not maybe so fair, but one of them is actually affiliated with CCP right now, right? Where I'm seeing so many titles in that studio where I'm just wondering, when did you make this?
Yeah. Well, so how this kind of maybe people out there may be wondering, like, how does this relate back to EVE Online, right? Because this is the reason why we're kind of like doing this show, why we're doing this coverage, is how does this sort of stuff, sort of come back to EVE Online, and to CCP. So one of the what I said at the start of this is like almost like a great sort of microcosm as to what's been going on in the gaming industry for the past like few years. What I mean specifically with regards to that is how certain companies that are now have a large stakes in many Western games companies and many Western game publishers, how they got to their position, to that particular position. Those two companies, one is much more egregious than the other. One of them is Tencent, and the other one obviously is NetEase. And obviously, anybody who knows what's been going on with Eve Echoes and Eve in general for the last few years has heard of the publisher NetEase, because they've been the publisher responsible for like helping CCP develop, pretty much developing, the new Eve Echoes kind of sort of mobile game. Sorry, go for it.
And it ties all the way back to a lot of CCP related topics, right? Because it ties all the way back to publishing Eve in China and Serenity, and having that license and losing that license and then getting that license back again being one of the criterion on the actual sale of CCP to Pearl Abyss, and then the whole thing of the topic of licensing and publishing, where PA has just taken their games in-house and no longer is relying on a publisher. It's just such a huge scene when it comes to how the gaming industry works these days, and it's not just a little bit relevant. It's very relevant for CCP, because the way that Pearl Abyss is going to potentially grow and develop is this whole thing of how do they learn best procedures and how do they get access to new markets. And this is basically why they bought CCP. I know they might not have said so directly, but it shows from what we did when we broke down the whole sale way back when it happened and was initially announced. But it's also something that you can see in how the actual budgets of PA and the financial reports from them basically show that this is what they're doing. They want to learn things from CCP. They want to collaborate when they need it. But other than that, they're not interested in micromanaging CCP when it comes to their IPs.
But that kind of relationship between Pearl Abyss and CCP is one of to a degree one of respect and of mutual sort of cooperation and mutual benefit, right? And that kind of flies in the face of kind of how those sort of those two, especially Tencent, though not too much NetEase, but how those kind of businesses initially started up, because how they initially started up was essentially there was essentially an embargo on being able to market Western games inside of China to the Chinese market, right? And so what these companies would do inside of China was they would take those IPs that are clearly quite popular in the rest of the world, and they would develop and basically crack and file off the names of those Western developers, put their name nice on as a sticker like over it, sort of thing, and then sell it internally to China, to the Chinese market, right? And so a lot of Western companies had issue with that, and we've seen this sort of thing. Like, I mean, if you've perused and been part of like Eve for quite a while, you'd have seen every so often the posts of like, this Eve ship model appearing on this random game, or this like these sort of nebula shots appearing on in other games and stuff like that. Like, I mean, the nebulas in Eve even turned up on a Star Citizen presentation at one point, right? So
yep.
And we had the whole kind of prospect and venture vulture kind of thing go on with Star Citizen as well. So those are only the sort of like the more obvious ones, but all of that happens inside.
You and I have joked about this since pretty much the early days of Star Citizen, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much almost calling it this. This is like a developer almost stealing at least 50% of the ideas from Walking in Stations, right? Well, all the vision that existed before the Summer of Rage and even during Siegel's era, and just almost like one for one copying all the concepts and all the sales pitch stuff, even though it's very clear that they couldn't deliver and they don't understand the mechanics that are required. This is again back to the original Eve DNA. It's not easy to copy that stuff.
No. There's a lot.
It's not like the sheep that you can just take a blood sample and then inject into a watt and then grow it. It's just you need to understand what CCP actually did with this game, because it's quite unique and no one has copied it yet. And every time they try, they end up with something that's a mess. I think the closest thing you ever got to this, someone allegedly had access to some of the source of early EVE Online and used it to launch a game. It was like this Russian mech game that had a lot of things that were really, resembling Eve so much that we had strong suspicions that they basically had almost ported the entire code directly and just reskinned it. I remember that thing very vividly. It was kind of fun.
I really need to find some screenshots of that at some point.
Yeah.
But
it's almost like archaeology when it comes to covering Eve and Eve news, because we are now on the second decade, right, and moving closer and closer to the third. Let's not forget, right? I think I'm going to have my 20-year anniversary in 2022 by October, right? So anything after that, I will have moved into the third decade. So it's a very old game, and when we look at it, let's be fair, it's amazing that it's been able to do what it's done, right? It looks crisp, it looks modern. Nothing would tell you that this is a 20-year-old game.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you said Eve was a 20-year-old game and showed them screenshots of what it is now, people would literally think that you're lying to them. You go back and you sort of tell people, like, show people games from 20 years ago, or even from 15 years ago, like MMOs from 15 years ago. Like, people will be like, these two are from the same era. Like, no, you wouldn't be able.
We need some early Eve screenshots and maybe some screenshots from the alpha. Those are fun.
Yeah,
they show their age. That's when you can see that's like the 90s programming and capabilities. And of course, historically, we broke the server so many times in the early days of Eve because it was completely overpowered. It couldn't really pull that. It's like launch drones, kill node.
Yeah.
You guys think that 5,000 people in system in tie-dye was a problem? Just imagine that 15 guys launching drones would crash the fucking node.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, CCP has tried to grow, its capabilities, Eve's capabilities, along with the size of the community that's there. But, like, we always seem to outstrip them. It's almost like it's some kind of like a law of sort of society, some sort of societal law that's in play there in some way, shape, or form. But anyway, back to kind of like the main sort of the main stem of the topic that we were going on and such. With regards to Eve's IP and IPs in general basically being hijacked, kind of thing, and people not basically sort of being able to deal with it. One of the main reasons why you have this kind of like this partnership with NetEase and CCP is the same reason why you have these partnerships with Western companies and Tencent, and you can basically sort of take this to talking about Activision Blizzard and the fact that that Tencent has like a large stake in that company. It basically, you can almost name most large scale publishers. EA, I think EA has a large amount of that Tencent has a large sway in EA as well. Epic does as well, even though their CEO is basically has gone on record to say that like he won't be swayed by Chinese sort of pressure to do this, that, or the other. But if you want to kind of see how how much sort of play they have, just swap over to here. It's 2020 in video games, and so here's the highest grossing games, right? In terms of rank 1 to 10, and the revenue that comes along with it, and you'll see that the publishers is Tencent / Bluehole. Then you have the publishers number 2, Tencent, and then you get come all the way through, and you'll see that Activision Blizzard has a large section sort of a large Tencent has a large stake in Activision Blizzard as well. Riot Games and Tencent as well. Hang on a sec. Just a second. Just a moment. We're just going to take a quick break. Okay, welcome back, guys. Sorry about that. I had a bit of an IRL sort of situation I had to deal with. as sometimes the case with some, a new show with new programming, new sort of scheduling kind of thing. Someone sometimes doesn't get the memo as such. But we are back. I don't know whether we wanted to carry on with the topic or whether we want to just like move ahead and move on.
I just wanted to close it off with pointing out that they, of course, we saw the actual financial report from NetEase, and they've been making a lot of money this year.
Oh yeah,
I think ended up with something like 3 billion or something like that in pure profits, which is like, wow, it's like 25% above normal. So yeah, they are becoming a massive power player in that whole thing. And of course, when it comes to Chinese markets, they do have this hybrid economy. So they have distributed things, but they want to retain control. As I said to you before we started, this is like the flip side of what is done in the West and in the capitalist societies, right? Because there we are supposed to have antitrust stuff that makes sure that the monopolies don't get too powerful, but they're not really that effective. And it's almost like the inverse of what you see in China, where you see potentially more and more branching can actually happen maybe in the future. But they start out as an almost enforced, not government monopoly, but government project monopoly. We just had news today that Microsoft has now bought the owner and the holding company, which includes things like Bethesda, right? I'm inclined to say that the fact that is allowed is almost proving that antitrust stuff doesn't really work, because you're just allowing this big monster to gobble up things. This is like the way that Amazon builds its business. We are allowing monopolies just as much in the West as in China. The only difference is who controls it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, because I wasn't it Disney bought some fairly significant companies fairly recently. I think it's like it's kind of one of those sort of situations, right? That antitrust laws and sort of monopoly commissions and stuff like that are sort of almost being sort of told to sort of look the other way, right? When this sort of stuff happens.
That whole shenanigan in Western business is just as problematic as the Chinese markets, and of course they're going to end up sort of figuring out a level playing field, but that's not going to happen until like 20 years into the future. But if you go back and compare to just 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it's improving somewhat in some areas at least. It's just that we need a complete overhaul of businesses that are IP based, because IP and money flow and the whole thing with legalese and law stuff when it comes to intellectual property, it's such a mess these days. We are losing so much efficiency from fighting these things and having you're as small as the company we just covered, they can't do lawsuits, not efficiently.
I mean, so one of the other topics that we probably will eventually get onto at some point on the next episode of the EuroShow is obviously going to be microtransactions as such, and how that kind of works and how that's sort of functioning, and but I forgot how I was going to lead this into what you were talking about.
This ties into the whole things like the conditions and where to start your businesses when you're working in something like IP, right? So
yes.
What's the cost of starting up a game developing business in China versus in France versus in Belgium or a Scandinavian country? That whole thing, it's very different from country to country. What benefits are there, and what the initial cost and so-called barrier of entry is going to be, right? The same if you have to expand again, if you want to be able to sell your product in other countries. All of these things are massively complicated, and five guys in a garage that just makes an amazing game, they're going to have problems, and it's going to be quite difficult to do, right? This is why we all know the story about Notch and Minecraft, but one guy can't launch this stuff in the entire world or control his IP. So of course he ended up selling the same thing with, now we have Valheim, three guys that's been outselling everything else like a complete blockbuster, right? And of course they're going to have to sell eventually too, because if they want to control that IP, they need someone that's actually got the legal muscle and the offices and the services that you need to run something like this. So this brings on the whole thing with, how does that relate to CCP? Well, the industry is well known to be a little bit nasty to its employees, and it's something that gets covered a lot by the gaming media. A lot of horror stories, but
we've had some horror stories from Blizzard, for example, right?
But at least there's also good stories from places like Riot. If you take the controversial ones aside, hashtag Me Too and whatnot. Anyways,
it's about those.
Let's not dig into that. But the point is that the CCP now, after the sale, is a little bit of a different place in many ways, and they look like they are moving forward with how to expand, and especially in regards to they lost a lot of the offices when they sold things off to make sure that it was possible to actually make a sale. So they've laid off a lot of people in that period. But they seem to be expanding again, and they've been doing a lot of hiring, but they've mainly been hiring in Iceland and London these days. So it looks like they're pushing on the London office, and that ties into one of the recent videos that we just got from CCP, which I personally liked a lot.
Yeah, do we want to play that, or at least play a little segment of that? Yeah. So. Okay. Well, let's. I'll see if I can sort that out. That might be a little bit awkward at the particular moment in time, but I will see if I can sort that out right now. by doing a little bit of
clickety click.
Clickety-clicketing. There we go. There's computer audio. That's what we want. Actually, it's not what we want because we've already... the joys of... okay. The joys of a new production and not everything being exactly where you think it is. So, obviously, you know, we may have seen this, but let's play a little bit of it anyway. And here we go.
I'm Erna Arnarsdóttir, and I'm the VP of People at CCP Games.
And my name is Hilmar Veigar Pétursson. I'm the CEO of CCP. Throughout our roughly 2 decades of history, we've used various ways to measure employee morale, culture, etc. I've seen CCP as a high trust environment and a low trust environment. So a great place of work and their focus on trust was kind of the motivation for the change. Also because the certification is a way for us to benchmark against other companies, and it's very internationally focused. So those are kind of the true primary motivations.
It's important for us to be compared to the best of breed. There is a high competition, both hiring and retaining good talents in the gaming industry. And it's very important for us to get the third party to actually certify that what we know, that this is a great place to work.
So when I think of business vision, then I'm a big fan of Jim Collins' Good to Great. And there we came up with our core purpose is to make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life. And our values to achieve that very audacious purpose are excellence, courage, honesty, and unity. When you are setting a goal.
Okay, so that was a kind of an excerpt of the video. But essentially, what's going on there is initially, timing-wise, people may have thought that it was related to a certain someone's sort of parody video regarding monetization, regarding expert systems. You know, the whole sort of milking the player base one.
Let's not talk about the cows.
Yes, but in actual fact, it was with regards to some certifications that CCP were able to get, and specifically they were the certifications regarding great place to work, and it sounds like a just like a phrase, but in actual fact, it's a name of an international organization that certifies workplace conditions and just like generally sort of like a certifying that a particular organization is a good place for employees to work and a good environment for employees to work. And so CCP has basically gained that certification in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and in London, and I believe more recently they also got the certification in Shanghai as well.
Wow, I didn't hear that.
I saw another indication as to that they'd recently got it in Shanghai as well.
I'm not that surprised because even though we've of course discussed working in Iceland and all the things that that entails and moving people to Iceland, you cannot get around. Well, there was also a financial crisis in Iceland that actually almost started up there. But the point is that Iceland, being a Scandinavian country, does actually have some fairly decent workers' protection and things like that. So when you're talking about maybe those salaries were lower than you could have gotten elsewhere, and maybe it was a little bit more complicated to culturally move to something like Iceland, but it also had a lot of upsides, because every time I've heard these comparisons and things, they never ever talk about things like purchasing power and relative salaries and all that stuff. It needs to be that is the discussion, right? Because especially now, because we're talking about something like London, and everyone keeps saying, well, just move to London. Yeah, but the cost of having offices or businesses in London is so massively high compared to most other places. course, that gets offset now with the political shenanigans and the tax benefits. So of course now you can say it's possible, but fundamentally that's the metric you need to make, right? You need to compare all the factors when you're talking about where you want to base your operations as a corporation. It's not an easy one-to-one. Let's compare salaries. That's just not the case, and it's not even comparing them based on purchasing power. It's also all the other expenditures as a corporation and the availability of things like raw talent and all that stuff. So I'm hyped about the fact that they seem to be expanding in London and in the UK. I think that's a really good move. It's going to make it a lot easier for them to grow. And of course, if they have success with the new title coming, it's definitely I'm seeing growth. I think I have predicted some of this already. And even though we are suffering as players in EVE Online, I don't think as a company CCP is in trouble, not even a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And with regards to sort of like, you know, the sort of the aspect of working in the games industry, there's a games industry culture that we haven't really touched on, but we'll touch on briefly because it is related to this sort of thing. And this sort of thing, this is basically the term crunch, right? And there was I believe it was a Eurogamer article, in actual fact. Just quickly jump to with regards to how big budget game developers outsource crunch. So you may have heard of the term crunch with regards to very negative kind of in a negative connotations. Essentially, games developers sort of pressuring their staff to work beyond the call of duty, as it were, to basically meet deadlines for games to basically be ready. And we saw sort of like the result of that when it kind of goes wrong with Cyberpunk. You know, their crunch, their sort of their crunch wasn't up to standard when it actually did release, and they took a lot of flack because of that. But what a lot of companies are kind of doing now to basically sort of offset, you know, the like the stigma of that kind of type of workplace sort of pressure is to basically outsource that sort of you know, the very menial sort of jobs that require a lot of time to other studios outside in basically almost internationally. And this particular article from Eurogamer is basically about how they're outsourcing crunch, and it also goes to a video that was made by
To me, when you say crunch, it sounds a little bit like a nicer word for day workers and sweatshops.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and it sort of the article basically links to a video that was done by People Make Games, which is a really good one. You know, there's a lot of like a lot of really interesting kind of stuff that they go on to about. But essentially, it's almost like the game equivalent of like outsourcing your product or outsourcing your development of like trainers and sort of footballs to sort of like sweatshops, right? That basically will do the work, but for like absolutely nothing, like for the tiniest amount of money in comparison to what you would normally want to sort of you would normally get it done with if you were doing it sort of yourself, for example. And it's a really good article. It's a really good video that you should probably check out. But it's kind of like, you know, it's sort of carries on the conversation as to you know, good workplace environments and how that's being basically developed, how people are trying to sort of take advantage of sort of outsourcing stuff, which is sort of like an interesting development of that kind of culture.
Yeah, and if you think about it in a historical perspective compared to something like CCP, what you're seeing these developers are doing, they are trying to break these things up into chunks and be international without committing, right? Without putting some sort of equality with their employees. They make it an outsourced thing, like external IT or external sanitation stuff and all this shenanigans. Whereas if you take something like CCP, they kind of tried to do proper CCP branch offices internationally, right? Of course, they had to sell some of them off, and some of the things didn't actually manage to bring in the bacon that was needed to keep them alive. So they had to close down or actually sell them off. We could go into talking about Atlanta and talking about Valkyrie and all that stuff. But the point is that they at least try to say they are actual CCP employees, they're actual CCP officers. This is not something with another name and no tie to the mother company. CCP developers were CCP developers, whether they were from Shanghai, from Atlanta, from London, or from Reykjavik. There might have been some internal differences, but fundamentally outside, we saw these employees all as equal, right? At Eve Meets, they were developers regardless of where they came from and what product they were working on. So in that sense, I think CCP has at least tried to not do these what I call bad practices.
Well, there was another video that came out from CCP in actual fact, sort of like in the past sort of week, that I think a lot of people were a little bit confused on as to why it sort of appeared, as it were, and it's related to this whole sort of like development of staff, development of good quality talent sort of thing, and it was this video. If we just transition quickly here, start it up. We'll play a little excerpt of this and then come back in, obviously.
My name is Hilmar Veigar Pétursson. I'm the CEO of CCP. CCP is founded in '97 in Iceland for the purposes of making a single shard, massively multiplayer online game. We got that done in 6 years, and we released EVE Online in 2003 in May. And ever since that, we've been chasing the tail of EVE Online. Specialization with people here. So being able to tap into the deep resource pool of potential employees here in the UK is fantastic for us. Tax relief in the UK is really helpful. It means that the government is supporting the industry and is deploying tools which are effective in attracting and growing the industry in the country. This has mattered quite a bit when it comes to us deciding where to build up. It concretely helps in terms of funding and de-risking projects, but it's also a clear statement that the government has this on their priorities list.
Okay, so that was just an excerpt from that video. Essentially, the kind of the reasoning for putting that video out is based around the fact that CCP is a member of an organization in the UK called UKIE, or the Association for the Interactive Entertainment Industry, UK Interactive Entertainment Industry. If I can find about UKIE, they're basically like a member of those members directory. And so there is a lot of people in there. As you can see, CCP Games is right there. And the idea of that is essentially that, at least in the UK, there's been this recent government push as to basically promote the UK as a center for games development. And that's kind of like basically where this, where the reasoning for this video is going to come from for CCP.
I can't help myself laughing a little bit because we were supposed to not be too political or controversial, but this is a push directly as a result of something like Brexit, right? Because this is about the fact that the UK needs to push their profile and the market shares of things like intellectual work, right? So this is a natural political thing to move on because after Brexit, they need to shift things around when it comes to their national economics. So this is a really good move. Of course, it benefits us as gamers a little bit, but it is a little bit competition thing with the rest of the world. So I find it a little bit funny, but it's going to mean that developing things like games in the UK is subsidized a lot by the government, and they are giving tax breaks and other benefits. This is very reminiscent of what happened. What is it? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, with Ireland, right? Where you had a similar move. So this is a good move. It's going to benefit game developers and software engineers and things like that are all IP based. And it also means that the office from CCP can expand and get some love.
New talent.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and there might be a lot of available talent because, as we said, this is a cutthroat business, and even though that Hilmer is talking about the fact that there's specialized talent, he's indirectly saying available specialized talent that fell out from other projects or got fired because, it's not the most safe work environment. You don't know if you are bought or sold at the end of a period, right? Because they have these massive periods where they have a lot of employees, and then when the product is finished, they kind of don't need them.
Yeah, and you know, with what CCP is kind of doing at the moment in the UK, obviously Tranquility, like EVE Online cluster is based in the UK, but what they're doing in the UK offices as such at the moment is more along the lines of actually developing a new IP, or at least maybe potentially an offshoot IP from EVE Online. We've heard a lot of this before with other offshoot related IP, related games, in the EVE universe, as it were. We're not. I don't think we know. Do we know whether it's actually EVE, whether it's in the EVE universe, or whether it's actually just a completely?
Yeah. The two titles we know for certain is under development in the EVE universe, actual New Eden titles. One of them is the quote-unquote shooter. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. I still suspect it's going to be something third-person action-like shooter. Whether you want to compare that to other existing titles of that kind or not, I think it's going to be in the Assassin's Creed, Horizon Zero Dawn, Last of Us third-person like thing, because that's like what is trendy right now. So I think it's going to be like that. But of course, the game design is going to be very EVE-esque. I think it's not going to be a pure shooter from what I have heard from rumors and dank leaks. But it is going to be a rather big title. And the second one is a strategic game in collaboration with NetEase. So that's the two titles that we know are almost certain until we get told that they're going to be shelved. That's actually what's about to be announced. So, and they have so much more potential and things that they can actually continue. Right, they can pick up old titles like Valkyrie and do more VR if VR picks up this. There's endless growth potential.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think that's I think that about wraps up what we're going to be covering on the show today, as it were. So I hope you kind of enjoyed it. We're going to see if we can kind of potentially sort of cut and crop some of this stuff into something that's manageable for YouTube, as it were. But I hope you guys out there enjoyed watching this as the initial Euro time zone TIS show. We kind of overrun a little bit. Premiered one, yeah. We kind of overrun a little bit. Like we were hoping that this was going to be about an hour. It's turned to about an hour and a half.
I have one end thing that I need to say. I'm contractually obliged. If you guys have videos that you want to have in our breaks, please contact us on the Discord server, and we will review the quality if it's up to snuff. But the rules are pretty much the same as the tournament rules. Both regarding length and content. So if you want your ads in this space, contact us on Discord.
Oh yeah, for sure. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff that we wanted to sort of talk about that we didn't get to talk about, and aspects of what we did talk about that we would love to talk about for like hours and hours more. We will do that in the Discord server that you should definitely be a part of after the show as well. So with saying that, thank you very much for watching, and I believe later on today there's going to be the usual US time zone show with Matterall, and usual schedule kind of going on. I believe we're going to be coming back on, when is it? Friday. So we'll do another Euro time zone TI show on Friday, and that'll be kind of our schedule: Tuesday, Friday. But that'll be everything from us, from me and Caleb, and from I'd like to thank Aurea, who was here briefly as well, and that'll about do it.